Okay. All right. So we're going to record this meeting if folks want to watch it later. My name is Michelle Parker. I'm the Vice President of Leadership for 2nd District PTA, and I am the two-time former legislation chair VP for the 2nd District. So advocacy is my jam. Super happy to be here and walk through Advocacy 101 with everybody here, answer some questions and help everybody to see themselves as advocates and help people progress along their journey with that. So thanks for coming. Just a quick FYI on what our 411 Wednesdays are is this series that we started at the beginning of the pandemic to help connect PTA members with each other as they were trying to figure out how to support their schools and help them not feel so isolated, but also just to give information so that we can all do better jobs at supporting the communities that we have in our schools. And so this topic, Advocacy 101, is one that's been requested since last spring. Lots of questions people have about how PTAs can work in the advocacy world and what kinds of rules there might be as a nonprofit and as a PTA and a membership organization. And then knowing, especially as we've got several elections ahead of us in San Francisco next year, we thought this would be a pretty timely topic. And then finally, you'll see this is a very winter holiday-ish sort of slide deck here. I hope you don't mind the slide theme. I just wanted to add a little variety and fun. And so Bigfoot and Yeti are here to help us tonight with that. So first thing, I wanted to have everybody, if you want to find where your reaction buttons are. I have some questions for you, so you can let me know how you do these things in your own life. So raise your hand on the emoji there, the reactions, to indicate whether you've done any of these things. Have you ever talked with your child's teacher and asked a question about how you can help your child, or have you ever asked for help with your child? Raise your hand. Great, 4 people. Have you ever spoken with a doctor about something your child needed? Maybe they were sick and you needed advice on supporting them, maybe as a brand new parent. Have you ever done that? Okay. All right. Have you ever attended a PTA or school site council meeting and asked questions about the data shared and voted on a plan, perhaps, to support students? Raise your hand. Okay, seeing pretty unanimous hand raising here. Have you ever contacted an elected official by phone, email, in person? Any elected official? Again, pretty unanimous support. Have you ever called a company to ask for a refund or to try to fix a problem with a product they had? All right. Have you ever helped a neighbor or a grandparent maybe figure out a bus schedule or figure out how something worked? Maybe volunteered for a campaign, suggested someone should vote a certain way based on what values you think they should support? All right. So hands going up on all of those questions. You are an advocate. Advocacy is defined as any action that speaks in favor of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends or pleads on behalf of others. When I first got involved with the district PTA as legislation chair way back in 2009, a number of parents from across the district got together and set up meetings with our local representatives to the state legislature. And I won't ever forget one day when we were sitting in Assemblymember Tom Amiano's office when he told us that it was our job as his constituents to tell him what he needs to know as he makes decisions. You don't usually get what you don't ask for, and that stuck with me. This was an Assembly member who helped get the original Public Education Enrichment Fund on the ballot in San Francisco. He made sure that school funding was watched out for with the establishment of the Rainy Day Reserve, and he still needed us as parents to advise him on education issues at the state level. So that was pretty empowering for me. And you can see this whole list here that the purposes of PTA include advocacy. It's our job to secure adequate laws for the care and protection of children and youth. We believe it's our responsibility. We also need to educate those decision makers, just like Tom Amiano, educate the public, and we need to influence laws, policies, and programs that will support our children. And then, of course, you know, when we talk in PTAs, there's always lots of fundraising going on, and there is no amount of fundraising that will equal the impact of a single piece of good legislation. As you may know, advocacy is at the heart of what PTA does and what it is here for. The National PTA is the oldest and largest volunteer association working exclusively on behalf of all children and youth. For more than 100 years, the National PTA has promoted the education, health, and safety of children, youth, and families. Phoebe Apperson-Hearst and Allison McClellan-Burney were greatly concerned about the nation's children, and the United States was feeling this enormous impact of the Industrial Revolution. There was an immense wave of immigration flowing into the country. Children were working in factories, in mines, and in the streets of the cities, and some could not attend school or obtain enough to eat. And so they wanted to figure out what they can do. And so they held their first meeting in 1897. After extensive grassroots work in different parts of the nation. These two women met in 1895, actually, and through diligent efforts planned a meeting to bring their ideas to others. And then on February 17th, our Founders Day, 1897, that meeting was held, and more than 2,000 men and women surprised Phoebe Hearst and Allison Burney by filling the hall in Washington, D.C. And the National Congress of Mothers was formed, and the work of the founders took on new meaning and strength. That movement grew here in California in 1902. There were similar concerns here, and the California Home and School Child Study Association was organized right here in San Francisco. And there was the Los Angeles Federation of Mothers Club also early on there. So California joined the national organization as the California Congress of Mothers and Study Circles, later becoming the California Congress of Parents, Teachers, and Students, the California State PTA. So meanwhile, growing in strength and numbers, the National PTA progressed remarkably in working for all children. There are so many things that they have done, that they got started then, and that we continue to move forward today. All right. Because of PTA, our nation has this is just a short list of the things that have been brought about in our country as a result of the PTA. We have kindergarten as part of our public school system. We protected children from unsafe working conditions. The hot lunch program that's in our schools exists because of PTA advocacy, the juvenile justice system, many other things. And even here in California, seatbelt laws, the yellow crosswalks here in San Francisco are all a result of advocacy by the PTA. And so we have to think about what we want to do next. All right, so tonight I'm just going to walk you through a few different things. I'm going to talk about how PTA takes positions, talk about that endless question people have about candidates. Can we support candidates? What can we do? And talking about that issues versus candidate question, provide a few examples, real life examples of ways that we have taken positions in the past, talk a little bit about how to organize and advocate, and then take questions and answers. So starting with how PTAs take positions. Okay, so PTA is a national organization. It's composed of 54 state congresses and more than 20,000 local units in all 50 states, plus Washington, D.C., the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and the Department of Defense schools in Europe. State PTAs are the liaison between local and national PTA, helping each to function effectively and to support and sustain each other. The California PTA is broken up into 27 geographical districts. It's not the same thing as school districts. This is different. And second district PTA, ours, is one of those. Some other school district or some other PTA districts have something called councils. Those are in between districts and units, or your school's PTA. We don't have those here in San Francisco. I'm using PTA and PTSA interchangeably. Most of our PTSAs are at secondary schools, middle and high schools, but they don't have to be. We have many PTA units in California. It used to be 1,000. I don't think it's quite that high now, but we have a lot. And we have about 62 unit PTAs here in the second district PTA. The PTAs are at the local level. They're really valuable assets to our school communities. They provide educational and parent involvement information, resources, events, and activities. And so this is the organization level that you are here representing tonight. Okay, so we have to figure out like who's taking the position on various issues, right? So the National PTA is the body who takes positions on federal issues. The state PTA takes positions on statewide issues. The district PTA here in San Francisco takes positions on citywide issues, and unit PTAs will take positions on their own neighborhood or local issues. And in order to take a position, we have to look at PTA authorities. So this is how we can justify a position or an action as an organization. And so this is a list of some of the authorities that we look to when we're determining whether we can take a position on something. I'm actually going to exit out of this slide in a minute and actually show you some of these, where to find them. So we have the California PTA legislation, policies, and procedures. There is the legislation platform that the state PTA organization has put together with our priorities. There's resolutions that are adopted at the state convention every year, and those are really powerful because those are member driven and voted on by our members. We have position statements that have been adopted by the California PTA Board of Managers, which is made up of all of the district presidents across the state, as well as other volunteers who have joined on to help advance the work of the state PTA. There are national PTA resolutions and positions, and we can also look to previous action that the PTA has taken on the same issue, look at the purposes of PTA, and also just generally looking at information from authoritative and professional sources. So I'm going to exit out of this quickly and show you where you can find. So here is the California PTA website. And when you land here on the landing page, you can go over to focus areas and you'll find advocacy. And here you'll see a drop-down menu that talks about current legislation that the California PTA is considering, the position statements that I mentioned, resolutions, any updates that the state PTA has for us, reports on any action that we've taken on bills that the Senate and the Assembly are they're considering, state ballot measures that we might have taken positions on. And then here's a whole bunch of resources for PTAs. Just give you a quick look at what that looks like. So this just talks about the legislative program. We'll talk more about advocacy chairs and what that looks like. And you can just see there's a whole list of links and information that you can go explore if you're really curious. And you can, it's okay if you don't know what any of this is. It's a place where you can begin to learn. And as you develop questions, just bring them to us at the district PTA. I'm happy to answer any questions. And if I don't know the answer, then I will get you the answer. But this is a great resource for you. And then you can also check out the National PTA website. And that is here. Show up here in a second. This is the advocacy page. Same thing. If you go on the regular homepage, you'll see this tab across the top that shows you advocacy gets its own tab, and same thing. Legislation that they're looking at, the PTA's positions, other resources you can find. Okay, back to the show. All right. So the California PTA is made up of volunteers just like you and me, and they volunteer to lead and represent PTA's priorities at the state legislative level. And so just wanted to see if you know this. We have this legislation action team. There are legislative advocates who are appointed by our state PTA president. And this group of folks is in Sacramento all the time. They're volunteering and working the halls of the state capitol, meeting with our members, assembly members and senators and staff. They are reviewing bills regularly when the legislature is in session. They look at all of the bills that are coming through, and they look at bills that might be related to issue areas that the state PTA cares about, and then they will look at those and review them and do their own study and bring those potential bills to the Legislation Action Committee, which is made up of some of our board of directors for the California PTA, as well as those advocates. And they talk through it. I've been on that committee. I served on that committee for a couple of years, several years ago. And it's an intense committee, you know, with lots of real thoughtful work happening to see if we can take positions. And then if we take positions on those bills, they actually try to influence the legislative members to take the position that the PTA wants them to have. They also study our priority areas, which are here on the right, education, which includes arts education and LCFF and LCAP, health and safety, community concerns, and parent engagement. So if you, sometimes even us here at the district level have wanted to take a position on something that is actually at the level above where we are. So if you're at a school and you want to take a position on a citywide issue, but the district PTA hasn't taken a position on it, that's okay. You can consider it. You can approach us at the district PTA and say, hey, are you going to take a position on it? I'd love you to consider it. And if we've decided we're not going to, for whatever reason, capacity issues, or maybe just competing priorities, we may not, and then you would be allowed to take a position on a city issue. Same thing for us. We could take a position on a state issue if the state PTA wasn't going to weigh in, as long as we follow a few steps. And that is making sure that both sides of the issue are researched, that we can identify the PTA authorities, like the list I mentioned before, are supportive of the issue. And then you have to have your general membership at your PTA level vote and get the proper support for that, and that you record that vote in the minutes, and then you'll have taken a position on an issue. Okay, issues versus candidates. So the PTA is a nonpartisan, non-commercial, non-sectarian organization. Elections involving candidates are defined as partisan elections, even if it's a nonpartisan office like school board. So we can never take positions on candidates. It's prohibited. That's part of our nonprofit, tax ID status. It would get us in trouble with the IRS if we were to participate or intervene in political campaigns for candidates. And there's another thing that maybe a lot of PTA leaders may not know, is that we cannot use our PTA titles if we choose to endorse a candidate for office. So if there's a school board candidate or a mayoral candidate or whatever, you are welcome to endorse them and support them in your private capacity. But I cannot say, like, I'm Michelle Parker, support this particular person, and then put right next to my name, PTA president or PTA, whatever the office is, on their endorsement materials. That is not permitted. It implies endorsement of the PTA. So if you see that somebody did that without your permission, make sure they remove it, because the PTA doesn't endorse in Canada elections. And then the other thing you want to consider is to use judgment in your private endorsements. And if you're in a leadership position where if you were to endorse in a certain race and then that person were to lose, how does that affect your relationship with the people who won instead? Does it? It's just a consideration to make. Just use your best judgment if you make private endorsements. And of course, just absolutely do not use your PTA title. However, if PTA members can, of course, run for office, we are all citizens. Well, some of us, we may not all be citizens eligible to run for office, but if we are a citizen able to run for office, you can list your PTA affiliation involvement in your biographical information. It wouldn't be something listed next to you on the ballot, but it is something you can include in your biography as work that you have done. Let's see, I think that was all I was going to mention on that. And go ahead, and if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and I'll try to catch those as we move along. And we'll certainly have time for questions at the end. Okay. So what can you do? It is really important for us to encourage our members to be civically involved. That is one of the values of PTA. We just can't weigh in on candidate elections, but we can provide information on candidates and help members learn, especially those down ballot races that people may not know a lot about. We can promote and organize voter registration. We can organize get out the vote activities. That's what GOTV means. It's get out the vote. So just encouraging people to vote, not telling them how to vote, just telling them to vote. We can also organize and participate in candidate forums. And if we do that, there are a few guidelines, and that is that all candidates have to be invited, not just the ones who may be more popular or more likely to win. All of the candidates must be invited. We have to disseminate factual, objective information about candidates. There cannot be campaign literature in the forum room, and there can't be any campaign paraphernalia worn at the event. So let's say that you like one of the candidates, you can't wear one of their buttons on you while you walk inside the room. That's not permitted in PTA PTA supported candidate forums. But those are some things that you can do. And I also just want to mention, because this is coming up here in San Francisco, that PTAs cannot take a position on the upcoming school board recall here in San Francisco. It's a recall is way too close to a candidate election, because even though it's a ballot measure, which is of course generally okay, we've taken positions on ballot measures plenty of times. This particular measure will be asking people to have a position on specific people. So we should encourage people to learn and to vote. We just can't tell them how to vote. There could be a forum hosted if you give equal opportunity to both sides of the issues and consider how to most effectively help people learn about the issue and the measure that's on the ballot. But the PTA cannot have any opinion about whether or not commissioners should be recalled. Okay, so that's just my last reminder. We take positions on issues, not candidates. All right, so I want to give a few examples, like practical real world examples, how we've gone about taking positions on a few things. So what we do anytime we want to take a position is we form a study committee. And that study committee is typically not larger than 5 people, but just a few is fine, 2 or 3 is okay. And that committee will research the issue. And so it might just be an issue, but it might be a policy that's coming before the Board of Supervisors or the school board, or it might be a ballot measure that's coming forward. So you want to research the issue to make sure you really understand it. And then you want to identify related PTA authorities. You would go to that list that I showed you online, looking up, for instance, the resolutions it's alphabetized. You can go through and see which ones might be related to the issue that we want to consider. And then you want to see if there is enough authority to actually take a position on that issue. And then you'll put all that together into a report. You make a recommendation to the membership, and then the members vote, and they can vote to approve it. So a study committee is not making the decision for the PTA. We are a member-driven organization. They're making the recommendation and saying, here's the work that we did. We're going to show our work. Here was the issue. Here's all about the thing. And then here are the authorities. We have to take a position, this specific position on the thing, which will be support or oppose or no position. And then, here's what we'd like to have the PTA do as a result. And then the members vote on it. So I have 2 examples I'll share with you. A couple of years ago, there was Prop A on the ballot, which was an affordable housing bond. And so we formed a small committee. You can see it was 3 people. I was on that committee, and we formed to study this proposition. And so this is just a screenshot of our report that we shared. And so we talked about what Prop A did, the benefits to it, the cons to it, and then we looked up all of the PTA authorities. And I'm happy to share any of these old reports with anybody if they're interested in learning and seeing the process that we went through. But we analyzed it using all the PTA authorities. And then as a result, we ended up recommending to the PTA membership that we support it. And this would, and it was primarily because we had authorities around making sure that children have access to affordable housing and that children are not homeless, that it is important for them and consistency in their lives and learning and things like that. So it's, but all of the authorities are cited in the report that we presented to the membership. And one thing I wanted to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about is how we advocated and informed folks on this. So we had 2 ways that we did this. If you are going to share information on a school site, like if you wanted to send something home to families, with children, it has to be factual only. And so anytime there's something that maybe the school district will take a position on, like the school board will take a position on, usually I have worked with the communications office to create what we've called a scrubbed version, a scrubbed flyer, which means it is totally factual, objective information. There is nothing persuasive about it that says you should vote this way. This is better. It doesn't use qualitative language that implies someone should support it. It just tells the facts so that people can become educated on the issue and make their own decision. And so anytime that's the situation, the district PTA will make sure that PTAs at the unit level will have a scrubbed version available if they want to share, in a way that's related to school SFUSD owned property in some way. But if you want to do anything persuasive, like if you want to tell somebody to vote no or vote yes, then you cannot use anything SFUSD owned. It has to be PTA owned. So that means that you Actually, I'm going to show you on the next slide what some of those list of things are. But so here we took a position on 3 measures. And so this was one of these graphics that we shared on social media, and we made a persuasive flyer that PTAs sent around to their units through newsletters and electronically through PTA owned channels, but not on the school site. The physical copies or digitally through the SFUSD website or anything like that. You have to use PTA owned property. So that means if you're in person, you also can't use a school copier, so if you wanted to make flyers, you can't use a school owned copier to do that. You can't use the SFUSD websites that your school has to do things like this. It has to be PTA owned. You can hand out persuasive materials on public sidewalks. So if you're standing back away from the actual school property, like not on the school parking lot, but like outside, at the block where people are crossing the street, or if you're away from the school, you can hand out persuasive materials. If you want to have a meeting where you're saying, hey, we want you to vote for this thing, you can't do it on the SFUSD school site in the property like you would at a normal PTA meeting, unless you work through SFUSD's facilities office to get a permit, a regular paid permit. Then you'll be allowed to talk about it because you're not using public resources to persuade people to vote a certain way in an election. So again, school sites, anything SFUSD owned, and this is part of SFUSD policy, by the way, factual, objective information, no opinions, just information, scrubbed. If you're using PTA resources, you can be persuasive. Say, yes, please go vote, go volunteer, do all of those things. We want you to vote yes on this. If you're doing it through PTA newsletters or texting or a PTA website or an offsite thing, like if you're meeting at a park to have some event, you can say, yes, please vote this way. You're allowed to do that. I'm just going to check the chat real quickly to see if there are questions. Yep, and exactly, Melissa. This is a great reason for PTAs to have their own dedicated websites and not just using the SFUSD page. This is something, there are many of us who know that, but we need to remind people at the beginning of the years that this is one of the reasons why, is because we're an advocacy organization. We want to make sure our members can actually advocate. So the other example I wanted to share with you is from last year. We were asked to consider Prop G, which was the youth voting measure. And so we did this study committee, went through all of the information, and, it looked great. There were a bunch of people who were really excited and hoping that we could support it. And then we couldn't take a position. So our recommendation was no position. And why? Well, we saw through the PTA authorities that the PTA has a clear position on youth voice and civic engagement. Those things are really important to us as an organization, but there were no clear authorities to support voting under age 18. So we made this additional recommendation that the second district PTA should draft and submit a new convention resolution to the state PTA to establish a new authority for the PTA. We have not done that yet. This is still on our to-do list. I will tell you that while I'm in this term, I would love to get this going this spring so that we have it all ready to go and submit next fall so that it be considered in the, I guess that would be the 2023 convention. I think that there's a trend this way, and there are a lot of people are excited about it. I've even talked to the youth commission at the city level who's interested in partnering with us on this. So this is an example of how maybe we hoped for positions, private people, me included, wanted to see this position, but we couldn't. We just didn't have the authority to do it. And so one solution is see if we can create some authority for the state PTA by going through an established process and by getting the support of the memberships to create a new authority. Okay, we'll take a quick break. That's a ton of information I've been throwing at you. Quick quiz, just to see what you might know about the structures that are helpful to understand as we advocate to decision makers. So let's see how we can do this. You can, I can't see all your faces, but feel free to unmute, or if you prefer to write in the chat, you can. I'm just going to ask you a bunch of questions. Okay, is our school district superintendent an elected position?
No.
No, it is not an elected position. Does anybody know how they get their job? Like how Dr. Matthews got his job?
Board of Ed hires
Appointed
them?
by the appointed by the Board of Education.
Yep. The school boards, their main job actually is to hire and fire the superintendent. So they do hire that person, and that is their only employee. The rest of the employees report to the superintendent. So yep, that's how they get their job. How many members do we have on our school board here in San Francisco? Anybody know? You can type it, or not 9. Another guess? You can type it, or yep.
7.
7. We've got 7.
Can
you all name them?
President Gabriela Lopez. Vice President Foga Maliga.
Yep.
Commissioner Sanchez, Commissioner Lamb, Commissioner Bogus, Commissioner Alexander.
Yep.
Commissioner Collins. Oh, thank you, Sue. Sue's just threw me Collins, because I was like, I can't think of who the 7. How many do I have?
That was 7. You got them all. Good job. Very good. Okay, how many, do you all know how many members of the Board of Supervisors we have in San Francisco? Plus 2
11?
student delegates, you're right.
17?
Nope. There's 1 for each district. That is correct. But how many districts do we have?
Not 17.
Nope, not 17. Too many. We have too many districts. Not 8.
Jessica says 8.
Not 12.
Joe says 12.
It's
9?
11.
11.
I said that the first time and you said no.
Oh, Liz got it. Yeah, 11.
Liz said 11. And just to go back for a moment, there are 2 student delegates that are also appointed to the Board of Education.
It is true.
Cannot forget our student.
Yeah, absolutely. There are two student delegates. However, their votes are not, they don't count when it comes to voting on policies. They are, I can't think of the right word to describe what their votes are, because certainly they matter. We want to know what students have to think, but they don't have, the authority.
An advisory capacity?
It's more of an advisory capacity. That's probably the best way to describe it. And I do agree, they have really good comments. Yep, so we have 11 Board of Supervisors members. We have 11 supervisor districts in our city. And those, I'm not going to ask you in this, but I'll tell you quickly, our school board and our Board of Supervisors terms are each 4 years long. The school board has elections every 2 years. There's 4 positions elected, 1 set, and then 2 years later, 3 are elected, so that they alternate. So there's 4, 3, 4, 3, and they happen every 2 years, but the terms themselves are 4 years long. And that is also the way that it works. And there are no term limits for the school board. For the Board of Supervisors, the even numbered districts have elections on 1 year, and then 2 years later, all the odd numbers districts have elections. So that's how they are staggered at the supervisorial level, to make sure there's not a huge turnover all at once. That's how they stagger it. They have a limit of 2 terms. So they have 2 4-year terms they can serve at once at the Board of Supervisors level. Okay, now this is a very tricky question. I'm curious if anybody, no, district number 1's the best, right? We both live there. And I do not know why the Board of Ed does not have term limits. It's a good question. I've wondered that myself, but a lot of school boards do not have term limits in California. I don't know if any do. I don't know if it's a state ed code thing or if it's different. And yes, the Board of Supervisors can return again after a break for another 2 terms if they'd like. We have seen that happen here. Currently, Aaron Peskin in District 3 is serving his 2nd set. And we've seen that even at the state level, right? We had our last governor, Jerry Brown, served twice. And so he had the same thing. He had a break in service before he served another 2 terms. How many elected officials preside over city government in San Francisco? Can any of you name which positions we have? Know how many elected officials we have presiding in city government? You can start naming them and we'll count together if you want. Mayor, district attorney, Yep, all 11 supervisors.
County judges or court judges?
Yes, that is true. They're not presiding over city government, but they are elected positions. That's true. So it's just like there are, they're separate. They're not presiding over city government, but they are elected positions, the Superior Court judges. Okay. Well, close. The assessor recorder. Yeah, the finance person is our treasurer. So the mayor, the treasurer, the assessor recorder. Maybe you all have heard recently, we have a new city attorney. That's an elected position, but there's an appointment until he has to actually run, our city attorney, public defender, the sheriff, and then all the 11 supervisors. They are the ones who preside over city government. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then the 11 supervisors. So that's 18. And then there are also 7 members of our city college board. We have 7 members of the Board of Education, 3 BART board of directors members. We have 24 members of the Democratic Central Committee, and we also have the Green Party, Peace and Freedom Party, Republican Party, all have central committees here in San Francisco, and then those Superior Court judges. So there's quite a lot of elected positions. How many state representatives do we have in San Francisco who represent San Francisco? Not who live here, because there's more than that, but who, I know it's hard to find Green Party information. Anybody know how many state reps we have in the Assembly and Senate?
One of each.
Nope. We have 2 assembly districts. We have AD 17 and AD 19. So David Chu was serving in AD 17, which is the east part of the city. And he just left his position to take the city attorney position. And now there's going to be an election for AD 17. And then the other assembly district, which is what AD stands for, is 19. And that is Phil Ting's district. And he also covers a little bit of the peninsula in his district. So those are our 2 assembly districts in San Francisco. But we have 1 state senator. Do you know who that is? Scott Wiener. He is the only state senator we have. We used to have 2. You all might remember. We used to have Mark Leno and Leland Yee. And then they redrew the lines. And so now we only have 1 state senator in San Francisco. Okay. Have any of you raised your hand if you ever spoken with, met, or contacted any of those elected officials? Okay, a few of you have. Great. Okay. Before I and other parents began increasing some advocacy efforts in the district PTA about 5 or 6 years ago, I remember feeling really intimidated. Well, actually, it's longer than that. I remember feeling very intimidated at the idea of meeting with an elected official. They seemed really important, and I felt like I just knew nothing. And I wondered why in the world they would want to listen to what I had to say. And I started cold calling offices. So this actually wasn't 5 or 6 years ago. This was like, no, oh my gosh, 12 years ago. So I started cold calling offices in the city and setting up appointments. And before long, parents were on their radar. There weren't parents reaching out to them before this. It just wasn't happening. It wasn't actually very hard at all, but it did take some research to figure out how to do it, to figure out who to be reaching out to, why, what their role was, and what we wanted to ask them for. And so it was really interesting and empowering to realize that actually we do have power, even if we're not experts. And so that was my first foray into really interacting with a lot of our local elected representatives. And some of you may know Jackie Chavez, who has served with the district PTA and in different positions over the years. And when she started getting active in the district PTA several years ago, she was also very intimidated by this and came to a legislation conference in Sacramento with me one year. And I just remember how excited she got when she realized that she could speak to them also. And she said, if you ever get a chance to hear her tell the story, you should. But she talks about how exciting it was to know that she was a constituent, and that what she had to say really mattered, and how that really shaped how she interacted with the community. And in her own district, she lived in District 11 in the Excelsior. And so after that, really started speaking up and developing a lot of relationships with the leaders in her own community because of PTA. All right, so let's get on with the rest of this. How to organize and advocate. So how to be an effective advocate? That's a big question we all have, right? So this is my bit of advice from many years of doing this, and also just the advice that we can find through several resources with the state PTA and otherwise. So the first thing you want to do is pick an issue. And I'm going to pair this, and this is kind of at the individual level, but also at the PTA level, like the organization level, say you at your own unit. So if you individually want to be an advocate on your own, then you pick an issue that matters to you, and then you'll go through this process. But I'm going to take us through if you're a PTA. So if you're a PTA at a certain school, you want to get people develop a culture of advocacy at your school. So what you want to do is pick an issue that matters to you, something that maybe a lot of people are talking about in your community, that they want to change, they're frustrated about, that they think can be improved, whatever that is. Together, choose an issue. And then the next thing you're going to want to do is learn as much as you can about that issue. Read up on all the resources you can find online, ask questions, figure out who might know a lot about the topic you're trying to learn more about so that you can be an effective advocate. So you're going to ask questions, attend meetings related to this. So if you're trying to learn how the school budget works, right? So we've got massive budget problems in our own school district, attend board meetings and listen and learn. You can find resources. So just learn about your issue. And then the next question for you, well, and actually let me back up on the learning, because there are a lot of PTA resources related to this too, especially if it's a state level issue. You can sign up for the California PTA legislative alerts. You can attend the annual California PTA legislation conference, which, guess what, is coming up very, very soon. In fact, the registration is open right now and the price goes up next week. So if you'd like to come to that, that's a great opportunity to learn about how the state education system works, and also to get to meet with people in City Hall, and then, attending meetings, like I said. And I have to put in a plug for attending committee meetings of any of these boards, like the school board committee meetings, like the curriculum committee or the budget and business services committee or whatever. And same thing at the board of supervisors. I actually find them to be much more interesting because there's a lot of conversation, much more detailed level than they can manage to do in a general board meeting where they've got a lot of agenda items. Committee meetings tend to be more like a couple of agenda items. So they'll go more in depth and you can learn more. So the next question for you is, who is the decision maker about the issue you care about? So if it's at the school district level, then that's going to be the school board, but it might not be. It might be something at your individual school, and the decision maker is your principal. And so if your PTA is trying to organize around something you want to change, or maybe you're working with your students because you want to change something on your school site, then maybe you're going to need to go to your principal. Maybe they're going to be the decision maker, or maybe they're working with you on it because they need the school district and some staff to help out with a particular issue related to your school. So you need to do a little research to find out who makes the decisions on the issues that you care about. So those are your first steps. And then you're going to want to think about what your story is. So now that you know your issue, you've learned whatever you can about it, you know who has the power to make the change that you need. Now is the time to advocate. So you're going to want to figure out a few things. Why does the issue matter? And kind of put these together in a plan. How does it affect you and the students at your school? What data and information can you share with the decision maker? So if it's something related to your school site, maybe you're trying to show that, hey, these lights have been out forever and ever, and our school can't replace them because people at the central office level have to come and do it here. And so we're going to tell you that these 7 lights in this place, or this is maybe a very small potatoes kind of an example, but just to play it out, give them all the information about what's happening and why it matters. And so we have that data information, and then you need to figure out, what exactly do you want them to do? What is the end goal in your advocacy? You want them to come and replace all those light bulbs so that the kids who are still in after school care until 5:30 still have light in the cafeteria before their parents come to pick them up? Well, then that's the end goal, is you want that done as soon as possible, right? So You want to tell your story, and you want to use all of that information to be able to tell the story. So now the next thing you need to do is get a meeting or send an email or launch some sort of a campaign, depending on what the issue is. Small potatoes sort of thing. Maybe this is really just, it's an email or a phone call or a few emails to get somebody's attention. But if it's something bigger, that's a policy issue, then it might take some serious organizing and letter campaigns, and maybe setting up a meeting with the person who can make the decision with several parents. So you're going to get that set up. Next, you're going to ask. You're going to let the decision maker know what it is that you want. That ask that you came up with as part of your plan on what you wanted to have happen. And then it's really, really important to follow up. Your advocacy does not stop as soon as you leave that meeting or leave that phone call or send that email. You have to follow up. These folks are busy. And if you don't follow up, unfortunately, you may not think that you're super, super serious about it. And if you are, then you need to follow up after a period of time. Maybe you have other people continue to follow up to show that it's an issue that many people care about. You know, many people advocating on one issue is always more impactful than if you have one person advocating on an issue. So keep that following up. And then when you've come to sort of the decision point, it's always important to say thank you, especially to your members. Whether or not you are successful in your ask, it's important to say thank you to your members for showing up, for participating. Let them know what the result of that was. Even if that decision didn't go the way you wanted it to, maybe it built your community better and it strengthened your relationships, and maybe it helps you improve your own skills so that next time you will be successful. And then if the decision maker you were advocating to supported your position and advocated with you and for you, then you need to say thank you to them, because guess what? They're more likely to continue to do the things that matter to you if you acknowledge it and you recognize their work in doing that. So that thank you is a really important component of advocacy. All right, I'll go through this list of activities that you can do as a PTA to advocate. And I'm not going to read through the whole list. You can look at this here and I can share the slide deck with you afterwards. But these are different kinds of campaigns you can do digitally and otherwise. It's really important for your PTA to have a relationship with local electeds or decision makers. When my kids were in elementary school, I started reaching out to our district supervisor and even all the candidates who were running so that they would come to our school and interact with all of our families and get to know them and get to know the issues that we cared about. And so we started developing a relationship with them, having regular meetings with them, and especially not just when you want something, but just to develop a relationship so that when you do want something, they already know who you are. You can do campaign activities related to positions that you've taken as a PTA or the district PTA. For instance, those measures I showed you before a few years ago when we supported A and C and E. We shared information. People could go drop off campaign materials on door to door and whatever. You can write letters. You can author a resolution the way we've talked about as possible if there's an issue you want to help create authority for. And the other thing I just want to highlight here is that there are a lot of advisory committees in the school district, many more than there were several years ago. And so you can try to get appointed to one of those so you have another opportunity to advocate and get to understand and participate in our cities, in our school district decision making. So that's an opportunity. There's also a lot of those kinds of bodies at the city level. And then I'm going to talk in a second a little bit about what an advocacy chair might look like at your school. And then it's really important that you vote and encourage your members to vote. No matter how they want to vote, just vote so that they have their voices out there for whatever it is they care about. Okay, an advocacy chair. So not a whole lot of our PTAs have this position, but I wish that they did, because then you have a point person who can help organize the PTA around whatever issue that it cares about. And so this is a list that an advocacy chair does not need to do all of this. They can just pick a couple and start small. Advocacy chairs do not need to be experts. When I first became the legislation chair for the district PTA, the quick story about that is that we had just finished, we had just gotten through the recession, 2008, 2009, when San Francisco was really feeling the effects of that recession. And so there were a lot of cuts at the state level to education. And the state PTA had a big big campaign, Cuts Hurt Kids. And I did a bunch of organizing at our school, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was just doing what I was asked to through the state PTA, but I thought it was really interesting. And then somebody asked me to, you should think about doing this at the district level. And so I came on to do it, but I had no idea what it was. Nobody had been in the position for years. And so I started researching and trying to figure it out. Met with Carol Kosovar, who some of you probably know, who's on our district PTA board and is the former state PTA president, and asked her opinion. And she's like, yep, that looks good. And it was really just build it how you like and just understand what the policies and rules are for PTAs and nonprofits, and then go for it. So I really got to create however I wanted to and thought would be most effective and support our PTA members across the city. And so that's similar to what an advocacy chair can do at a unit, is whatever you're most interested, whatever capacity you have, just do a little bit, or do a lot if you'd like to. But a few things you could do are to help your PTA identify priority issue areas and advocacy goals just for your unit. And I think that's also a great unifying activity, where you can have a brainstorm, like what issues would we like to work on together as a PTA. Advocacy chairs can ask lots of questions. No one is an expert when they start here. So meeting with people, researching, asking questions when you don't know the answer. I think it would be great if you want to establish a culture of advocacy in your PTA, is to provide regular updates at your PTA meetings, or share something regularly in newsletters, just so it's kind of front of mind for everybody. You can attend trainings, organize your members when that's necessary. Forming an advocacy committee is a great way to build a pipeline of leadership, so that when you're not in that position anymore, someone else can take your place, but also there's just more strength in numbers when you're dividing the work. And that the relationship development I mentioned, and then just to get creative. Okay, that was a ton of information. So does anybody have any questions about anything that I shared or didn't share before I just show you sort of the last list of resources you can look at later? You can unmute. Yeah.
I don't have a question. It's more of a comment. I just wanted to let people know that as a PTA, as parents, but in general, but as a PTA, you can invite you can invite people in San Francisco, the superintendent, the supervisors. You can invite them to events that you're highlighting. So Absolutely. Like at Presidio Middle School, we do a Black History talent show. So every year we invite superintendents, we invite commissioners, and we see, and sometimes people can make it, sometimes they can't. But it's nice it's a way to get them to see you, recognize you, and get you on the radar, even if it's their secretary, right? So a lot of times it's their secretary who is their first line of defense and your first line of contact. Mm-hmm. And once they get to know you, you can get some messages through that way. So just invite them to things you're doing.
Absolutely. Yep, that's a great idea. Any of the elected representatives, that's totally okay. When you get into the candidate scenario, you cannot invite candidates to speak to your PTA, even if they're your PTA member. If you were to invite any candidate, you would have to invite all candidates and treat it like a forum. But if you want to invite sitting elected officials or sitting leaders like the superintendent, you are more than welcome to. And believe me, they love going to do that. And it helps them connect with the people they're supposed to be representing. So I think it's a great idea to do, to not be shy about doing that. Thanks, Carla. Any other comments or questions? Okay. I have this list of resources, and I can share this slide deck in the chat in a second, and I'll send it out also in follow-up email. This is a bunch of resources that I find particularly helpful. The California PTA advocacy page that I showed you all, the national page that I showed you, and then we also have a page on the 2nd District PTA website about how we take positions on issues. You can check that out. And whenever we're taking positions on ballot measures, that's where you'll find the information about it. And then these last 4 links, I think, are just generally really helpful for that learning phase of your advocacy journey. ed100.org, probably all of you are familiar with that at this point. It helps everyone learn about how the California education system works. It's written in very accessible language that you don't have to be some education expert to understand, and it's broken up into different areas of the system in chapters. It's something you can even go through with your PTA, sort of a book club type experience. And so there's that on all the areas of the system, really. EdSource is education reporting, but they're pretty comprehensive and they have lots of articles every day. So if you're wanting to read about some movement on particular legislation at the state level, there's probably an article about it on EdSource. If you're wanting to understand some background on how Prop 98 works, you can do a search on EdSource and you'll probably find some articles that talk about it, especially if there's something happening in the news related to it right now. The California Legislative Analyst Office has really fantastic reports and frankly are pretty easy to get through as well. They tend to be on the financial side and impact of policies on education. I gave you a link here to their education tab on their site, but that is definitely a place to go that I go to when I'm trying to understand the impact of potential or the potential impact of proposed policies or things that have already passed. It's a great place to go to learn more about the local control funding formula, for instance. They'll talk about the history of that. They have some papers like that. And then the last one I listed is the Learning Policy Institute. They're a great research organization. They were founded by Linda Darling Hammond, which some of you may be familiar with, who's just a fantastic mind, former teacher and researcher and very respected in the field. And so there's a lot of research there if you're wondering about the efficacy of certain approaches we take in our schools to leadership, to retaining teachers, to grading policies, whatever it is, it's a great place to go check out. And then finally, this is one of my favorite quotes I've been looking at for many, many, many years now that I want to remind us in our PTAs is that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And that is it. That is it for my presentation. And any other final comments or questions before we close out?
I have a question. Did you have a mentor when you first started, or you were by yourself when you first got started, like in 08 or 09, or how did you, or did you not need that?
Well, I would never say that I don't need that.
I meant to, clearly you kept going forward, but I was just curious.
I'm a pretty self-motivated learner. And I will go ask questions when I need to learn and motivated that way. And so I did a lot of reading, a lot of asking, a lot of showing up at meetings and conferences to try to learn. I would say that if I had a mentor, there are a couple of people who I would ask questions. Carol was one of them because she's done a lot of advocacy in her time. And so I would come up with ideas and plans and then go to Carol and say, does this look right? And she'd be like, yep. And then that was it. She'd say like, yep, looks great. But also at the district PTA level, they actually have mentors for all of the district PTA presidents. And then at the time that I was the legislation chair, they also had sort of a mentor for legislation chairs and VPs. I don't think that they do that anymore, but they did used to do that. And so members of the legislation committee at the state PTA were sort of divided. They divided all of the districts across the state between those folks. And so I had somebody I could call if I had questions, and occasionally I did. But I did a lot of research and reading and learning and attending things just to kind of soak it up like a sponge. Is how I learned a lot of it, but asking questions whenever I could, for sure.
Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? I'm going to turn off the recording.